Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Today we're going to talk about a number of headlines, both directly and indirectly related to Bible prophecy, and we're going to have a special emphasis on, well, what's coming next. So the stories we're going to look at today, I believe, indicate where we're headed next in the months ahead as we enter 2023. What should we expect to see more happening? What should we expect to see more of? What are the key stories? So these are just some of them. It's not comprehensive by any means, but I think that's what all these stories today have in common is what we should expect to see next. So first I want to start with this one right here. This is from Cointelegraph. It says Nigeria bans ATM cash withdrawals of over $225 a week to force use of its central bank digital currency. It says the limits set by the Central Bank of Nigeria are part of a broader push to encourage digital financial transactions. And we talked about this earlier this week when I was a guest on Tom Hughes' program, Hope for Our Times. We've talked about it last week when we talked about what would happen with the rollout of central bank digital currency, how that's going to lead to tyranny. So you'll want to check out those videos as well, because this plays hand in hand with that. It says Nigeria has drastically reduced the amount of cash individuals and businesses can withdraw as it attempts to push its cashless Nigeria policy and increase use of the e-naira, Nigeria's central bank digital currency. The Central Bank of Nigeria issued the directive to financial businesses in a December 6 circular, noting that individuals and businesses would now be limited to withdrawing $45 per day or $225 per week from ATMs. Individuals and businesses will also be limited to withdrawing $225 and $1,125 respectively at banks per week. And here's the key, with individuals hit with a 5% fee and businesses with a 10% fee for amounts above those limits. Now that's the key. We talked about how are they going to get people to adopt central bank digital currencies. Well, in order for that to happen, there's no benefit to an individual to adopt that form of currency, which is why we haven't seen that adoption happen in Nigeria yet. So the only way they can get that to happen is to change the incentive structure. That means rewards for using it and punishments for not using it. And we've talked about how they are restricting, it's not just Nigeria, but governments all around the world are restricting the amount of currency that you can deposit in a bank and you can withdraw from a bank. Why are they doing that? Well, they claim it's to stop criminal activity. All money laundering's taking place, mobsters, there's all these various reasons that we have to restrict the cash that you can hold and transact in. But in reality, what they're trying to do is surveil you. They don't want you using cash because then they don't know what you're doing with it. Not because they care so much about money laundering and illegal activities, but because they care about power and control and surveilling what you're doing. And so what we read right here in this article, when we look at 5% fees and 10% fees for amounts over the allotted amount, that's part of this incentive structure. And they'll do the same thing once they get everybody on board with the central bank digital currencies. That time they'll use it to control things. So they might say, oh, we're entering a recession, we need people to spend more. If you don't spend a certain amount, so anybody that has more than $10,000 in their account, any amount over that's going to get hit with a certain percentage fee if it's not spent by this time frame, in the next month. And they believe that they can control the business cycle, they can pull these levers and manipulate the economy in a positive way by doing that. It's never worked in history, but we've seen throughout history there is always an arrogant elite that believes that they know best, they know better than you what to do with your money, and they think they can control it. And that's what we're going to see here with this. It goes on. It says the limits are cumulative for each withdrawal. So an individual withdrawing $45 from an ATM who then tries to withdraw cash from a bank on the same day would be hit with the 5% fee. So they're really going to try to control this. It says adoption rates for eNARA have been low since its launch October 25th, 2021. As reported by Cointelegraph on October 26, the Central Bank of Nigeria has struggled to convince its citizens to use the central bank digital currency, with less than 0.5% of the population reportedly having used the eNARA as of October 25th, a year from its launch. Nigeria established its cashless policy in 2012, suggesting a shift away from physical cash would make its payment system more efficient, reduce the cost of banking services, and improve the effectiveness of its monetary policy. Again, all of these are benefits to the government or the system at large, but not the individual. Therefore, it's not surprising individuals aren't adopting this. What they fail to mention here when they're talking about this more efficient system is, well, it would also happen to give the government massive control, power, and the ability to surveil almost every aspect of your life. We conveniently forget to mention that, but you should adopt it because of greater efficiencies and will stop those money launderers, right? It says on October 26th, the governor of Nigeria's central bank noted that 85% of all Naira in circulation was held outside of banks, and as a result would be reissuing new banknotes in an effort to drive the shift toward digital payments. So we've seen this too in the United Kingdom, as well as in India, where they retire these old notes, and you've got to turn them all in or you lose them by this certain time. So they're going to do that here, and it looks like they're going to be reissuing those notes, and you turn in the old ones maybe for the eNaira. I don't know what their plan is with that, but you can be sure their goal is to direct people toward these digital payments, so it will be to that end. According to a CBDC tracker from the American think tank Atlantic Council, Nigeria is one of 11 countries to have fully deployed a central bank digital currency. 15 other countries have launched pilot programs, with India set to join the ranks later this month. So guys, this is what's coming. This is one of the things coming next, is this rollout of central bank digital currency. We're going to see that happen in the months ahead. By the end of 2023, I expect this will be fully deployed in almost every major country in the world. Now, when I say that, I mean fully deployed, similar to how it is in Nigeria now, where it's out there, it's operational, it exists, but nobody uses it. Because why would anybody use this? Why would anybody say, well, I don't gain any benefit from this, but it would give the government immense power and control over my life and surveillance into every activity I undertake, so I'm going to go do it, right? Nobody's going to do that, but they will deploy this, they'll work out all the bugs, and then maybe toward the end of 2023 or in 2024, who knows, maybe in tandem with the rollout of this, but I think they'll probably try to work the bugs out first. That's when the incentive structure will get very rigid, just like we saw with the rollout of something else in 2021. At first, it started out, it's here, if you want it, go get it, right? And some people did. And then they said, hey, if you can get a cheeseburger and some fries if you do it. That's what the mayor of New York said. And then they said, well, we'll have lotteries. Your name will go into a lottery and you might win $1 million. And then it became, all right, if you don't get this, you can't go to the baseball game, you can't go to the movie theater, can't go to the restaurants. Then it became you can't go to grocery stores, you can't have a job. So they will roll out rewards first, then punishments second, and they will make those more and more constrictive until they get a wide enough adoption that they can start to kick people out of the system who haven't adopted it yet. And we've seen that with the rollout of the other thing where they're saying, well, now we have this international travel plan where if you don't have this, then you can't get on an airplane and go from one country to another. And so we're going to see that with this too. We're going to see the incentive structure put in, and that's why we said last week that when this happens, the rollout of these central bank digital currencies and they get adopted, tyranny begins. There will be no escape. Once you walk into that cage, they'll slam the door shut and there's no way out. So our next article, this is from BBC News. It's titled, UK Sleepwalking into Food Supply Crisis, says Farming Union. We've talked about this in the past as well, but we're seeing this start to heat up. It says the UK is sleepwalking into a food supply crisis and the government must step in to help farmers, the National Farmers Union has warned. And again, we talked about this in the past. No, the government must not step in. The government is the problem. The government needs to back off. If the government does that, problems will resolve themselves. Yields of tomatoes and other crops will likely slump to record lows this year, it said, with potential supply problems ahead, as already seen with eggs. Soaring fuel, fertilizer, and feed costs were putting farmers under severe pressure, it added. The government said the UK has a highly resilient food supply chain. So here we go with the government's official denial. Here's the government's official position. We have a highly resilient food chain, which we're going to read in a second. Not so resilient. Some supermarkets are rationing egg sales. I thought it was a highly resilient food chain. After farmers cut back or halted production because of rising costs, a situation made worse by the avian flu outbreak. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a video. We went through that. They're trying to blame it on the avian flu outbreak, but we had that earlier in the year, and the supply issues weren't the problem they are now. What it is now, it's a problem with the stores willing to pay the farmers what it costs. And farmers aren't going to produce at a loss for long. They would go bankrupt. They go out of business, and that's what they're facing here. It says, however, the NFU warned that food producers in other areas were now facing difficulties. It said yields of energy-intensive crops, and governments can't print energy, we've talked about that too, like tomatoes, cucumbers, and pears, were likely to hit their lowest level this year since records began in 1985. It also said milk prices were likely to fall below the cost of production. They can't do that for long. While beef farmers were considering reducing the number of cows they breed. Rising costs were to blame, it said, with fertilizer prices for farmers more than tripling since 2019 and the cost of feed and diesel up 75%. Soaring energy cost, Brexit red tape, and worker shortages were also factors it added. NFU President Minette Batters said British food was under threat, with the future of British fruit and vegetable supplies in trouble. Already, high food prices were sure to rise further if products became harder to source. This is about government prioritizing food security, and if they fail to do so, we will continue to see greater contraction in our production, a reliance on more imports, and availability is just not going to be there, she said. We are self-sufficient in eggs. It's been a massive success story. And we now have 320 million less eggs for the same period this year than we had last year. But Andrew Opie, Director of Food and Sustainability at the British Retail Consortium, said that retailers were used to managing pressures across their supply chains. Supermarkets source and will continue to source the vast majority of their food from the UK, and know they need to pay a sustainable price to farmers, he said. And that is the key right here. Consumers are under pressure because of inflation, so they're shopping around. They're not really willing to pay higher prices if they don't have to. The supermarkets are aware of this. They're trying not to pass those costs on to consumers. They don't want to bear those costs themselves, so they're pushing the farmers. They're trying to take the profit away from the farmers. But the farmers are saying, hey, with the rising cost, we can't afford to sell at this price. So the supermarkets can go and source from overseas, other places, and consumers aren't willing to pay a higher price for something just because it was grown locally with inflation the way it is now. And so you're seeing these local producers say, we can't produce at this price, so we're not going to. And this is going to cause big problems 6-12 months down the road, because we're seeing these rising costs of fuel and fertilizer. It's a global issue, and a lot of farmers are saying, I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's happening in countries all over the world. And we have less fertilizer applied and less farming in general. You're going to get less food production, less agriculture production. And that's going to lead to massively higher prices. And somebody's going to get locked out of that game at the country level and at the individual level. Even in the wealthiest countries, you're going to see massive food price inflation. I know we've seen a lot of food inflation, guys, but it is going to get worse throughout 2023. Now, one of the things they mention in here is the cost for the average consumer, and they talk about the official inflation numbers. And I want to add, you look at some of these official inflation numbers, guys, they're made up, they're lies, and there's a reason for that lie. A lot of these countries pay benefits out. So in the United States, it's Social Security benefits, and the cost of living adjustment for those benefits is linked to the official government number related to inflation. So in the United States, that's called the CPI. So if they claim that inflation went up 8% and it really went up 15%, well, that saves the government a lot if they can say, well, you're getting an 8% raise in your benefits. Yay! Even though the cost of what you need to buy went up 15%, they can claim you got a raise, but the government is pocketing the difference. They're saving that. Or not saving it necessarily, but it's a hidden tax on everyday people. And so what I want to point out is we may be nearing we're definitely in a point of much higher inflation than what's reported. But in societies that have experienced hyperinflation, like Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe just a few years ago, you often find shortages of items. Because think about it, if the store, a lot of people might think, well, the grocery store is selling this at a much higher price, so they're doing just fine. But they have to take the proceeds once they sell that food and turn around and buy new inventory for the next day so that the shelves aren't empty. The problem is, in a fast rising inflationary scenario, the money they received from selling it isn't sufficient to buy the new inventory without taking out a loan, and people are less likely to lend in such an environment where their purchasing power is dropping. And you see this ripple all the way through the supply chain to the point where you see what we're seeing here, which is farmers saying, I'm not going to produce anymore. And that leads to shortages. So look for more shortages of specific items and much higher food prices in 2023. Next article I want to look at, this is from Zero Hedge. It says China confirms it is mystery massive gold buyer with first official purchase in 3 years. 1 month ago, we sparked a frenzy across precious metals circles when we reported that a mystery buyer had bought some 300 tons of gold, roughly 3/4 of what would be a record 399 tons of central bank gold purchases in the third quarter. While regular readers already know the details, which we laid out here, and they put a link, it says here again is the bigger picture. Central banks bought a net 399.3 tons of gold in the July-September period, more than quadrupling on the year according to a November report by the World Gold Council. The latest amount marks a steep jump from the 186 tons in the preceding quarter and 87.7 tons in the first quarter, while the year-to-date total so far surpasses any full year since 1967. Guys, we talked about this before. What was happening in 1967? Well, we were in the last waning years of the Bretton Woods system post-World War II. The United States was about to close the gold window and end its peg to gold and begin a new monetary era dominated by the petrodollar, which came along a few years later. But guys, this is a sign that we're entering a new system. We've talked about that recently as well. And again, the key information is buried down at the bottom of the story. So we come down here And it says, well, why now? Why is China doing this now? Well, as Bloomberg reports, echoing Nikkei above, for China, the need to find an alternative to dollars which dominate its reserves has rarely been greater. We've talked about this. This is the nations of the world, the BRICS nations, are moving away from the dollar. They're getting rid of their dollar foreign reserves, all these treasuries they hold, this U.S. debt, they're getting rid of it in favor of gold. And they're trying to set up their own currency system, their own financial system, their own system of international trade, and end U.S. dominance and dollar dominance of the global financial system. That's what they're saying here. It says tensions with the U.S. have been high since measures taken against its semiconductor firms, while Russia's invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated Washington's willingness to sanction central bank reserves. In other words, now that the U.S. has shown it's ready to weaponize the dollar, any U.S. dollar reserves held by the Fed, Western banks, or any other counterparty could and will be promptly confiscated if China does something unpalatable like invading Taiwan, which is why China is desperately seeking money without counterparty risk. Here it has just two choices, crypto or gold. For now, it has picked the latter. So we're seeing a lot of nations woke up to this idea that if we do something that the United States and its allies don't like, they can freeze us out of the Western financial system. They can steal our foreign reserves. So we need to insulate ourselves against that possibility by acquiring gold that we hold ourselves, because there's no counterparty risk. You're not dependent on another nation's promise in order to retain that value, that purchasing power. And so this is bad for American power, American economic and military might. It means that the world, China, Russia, all these other nations are moving away from that. It means an end to the petrodollar system. We've been over this in several videos that you need to go back and watch, because this is what's coming as we move through 2023. We're going to see more and more and more of this, and it means American power and might, and America's superpower status is coming to an end. The United States of America, unfortunately, is a dying empire, and these nations are trying to hurry it along by their actions, as evidenced in this second Zero Hedge article. It says President Xi arrives in Saudi Arabia for MBS red carpet treatment and epic-making 3-day visit. President Xi has touched down in Riyadh on Wednesday, kicking off a 3-day visit to Saudi Arabia this week to meet with the king in what marks his third trip outside the country since the pandemic began, and his first to the kingdom since 2016, or over 6 years. He was greeted with a lavish reception at the airport as the royals rolled out the red carpet, in notable contrast with Biden's somewhat muted presence in Jeddah in mid-July. And we've talked extensively about this and what it means to the petrodollar. Saudi Arabia has turned from this relationship with the U.S. that's dominated U.S.-Saudi relations for the last 50 years. This U.S. petrodollar and the idea that oil will only be traded in dollars, that has stabilized the dollar. It's underpinned the dollar for the last 50 years, and that's been the basis of international trade and oil policy all over the world. That is changing. Saudi Arabia is now shifting its attention to China as its number one customer and number one trusted partner. And this meeting is just the latest indication. It says the state-run Saudi press agency reported that King Salman initiated an invite for the Chinese leader to bolster historic ties and strategic partnership between the two countries. China's foreign ministry only unveiled and confirmed the trip Wednesday morning, hours before Xi's plane entered Saudi airspace after months of rumors of the impending visit. SPA noted that initial agreements worth nearly $30 billion are to be signed during the bilateral summit. Then we read down a bit. It says Al Jazeera previewed that the trip is expected to be a much more celebratory atmosphere compared to Biden's summer trip, wherein he more or less groveled to get the Saudis to urgently pump more oil, which they later slammed the door shut on. According to the publication, China is Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner, and MBS is expected to give Xi a lavish welcome when he lands in Riyadh on Wednesday, a marked contrast to the muted reception given to President Biden in July. And when we scroll down, read this key paragraph. Like, this sums it all up. It says, analyzing what's at stake and the potential impact in Saudi-U.S. relations from Xi's trip, prominent D.C.-based Saudi banker and former political insider Ali Shahibi commented, Saudi Arabia is, of course, not indifferent to the U.S., which continues to be a key partner. But the kingdom has learned the hard way that the U.S. cannot be relied on consistently for support. Guys, that's the key. We think back to the end of August of 2021 when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan. It sent a major message to all the countries around the world, especially Saudi Arabia. Why? Well, the U.S. went into Afghanistan and they made all these promises to the people there. They said, help us out, translate for us, help us on the ground, and we will protect you from the Taliban, we'll safeguard the country. And then they just abandoned all those people. American citizens were abandoned behind enemy lines, just given over to the Taliban. Countries like Saudi Arabia saw this and said, well, we have a security agreement with the United States. They've agreed to protect us. I don't know that we can rely on them anymore. And the very next day, they made a defense pact with Russia. And we saw a major shift in this petrodollar system that's just been ongoing ever since. And so part of this agreement that we have here between China and Saudi Arabia, they agreed not to comment on or interfere in each other's domestic politics. So think about, when has that happened before? Well, the United States has done that to both China and Saudi Arabia. And I'm not saying that the United States wasn't right to criticize those two countries for their domestic policies, but they had to realize the implications of doing so, especially when you have one partner that you rely on for oil and one that you rely on for manufactured products. There are implications, there are consequences for the policy shifts and the stances that are taken, and we're seeing those play out right now. So what does all this mean? Well, again, I think it means the end of the petrodollar. It means waning influence and power by the United States in the year ahead and in the years ahead. So all these stories tell us what's coming next, where we're going on God's timetable. Guys, we live in the season of the Lord's return. Jesus said, when you see all these signs, you know, when you see them converge, that the end is near, that I'm right at the door, that I'm coming back. And we see this in all of these articles. We see the rollout of central bank digital currency, the very platform, the foundational technology that gives rise to government power that is indistinguishable from the mark of the beast that we read about in Revelation 13. The ability of the government to control who's able to buy and sell, and to be able to just cut that off on a whim. So governments are going to have that power going forward. And they've had that power to a large degree, but it's just going to get even greater and greater. The ability to surveil what people do and to create a closed system that everyone operates in and that no one can exist outside of. We're seeing that come. How will they roll this out and get it adopted? Well, one of the ways very well may be a food crisis. As we saw in the UK, we're seeing that happen. It's a global food crisis. Could it be that central bank digital currency becomes your ration card in that world of food crisis? And that in order to gain access to food, you have to have a central bank digital currency. And then, of course, we're seeing the dominant currency, the US dollar, under attack from abroad by the BRICS nations and by all these other nations that want to join them, like Saudi Arabia, that's turning to Russia and Saudi Arabia after a long relationship with the United States. And so we're seeing geopolitical shifts and changes that point to the world that the Bible outlines, waning US influence and rising Russian influence leading into the Gog of Magog war of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Following that encounter, Russian influence will completely go away as God destroys their military power. But we're seeing the world take shape just as the Bible said. Again, we live in the season of the Lord's return, so have hope. There's good things ahead after all of this takes place, because we know in the end, Jesus is coming back. Jesus is going to rule and reign over this earth. So put your hope in Jesus. Let me know what you think in the comments below about all of this. What do you think is coming next? What do you think are going to be the big stories going into the rest of this year and into 2023? Let me know below. Make sure to like and share this. God willing, I'll see you on Monday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.